Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. I am Yori Folarin. Today we're going to take a stab at understanding the MPR, otherwise referred to as lending rates to you and I, but when experts talk and all these analysts, then they throw in those things like MPR, but effectively lending rate to you and I if we wanted to borrow money. Now, the central bank, as the regulator, has left it at 14%. Some say for the 11th consecutive time, but others say that, no, it's a bit more than that, might even be 14th, 15th time. Okay, be that as it is. But why has it been left as at 14%? It's not necessarily, it's not the highest it has ever been. In fact, there was a time, forget the year now, when it was as low as 6%, but that one was like a flash. So why everybody's crying, everybody's looking for money, everybody wants to borrow money, but the cost is prohibitive. This has not helped anything. The CBN governor has said that he's aware that that indeed is what is required, but they decided in the Monetary Policy Committee that one has to be very, very careful there, lest they actually fuel the rate of inflation, which will then make rubbish of anything. Enough from me. There are experts in the House that will help us understand what this whole matter is all about. Mr. Henry Boyo is an industrialist and an economist. Thank you very, very much for coming on the program.
Thank you, Yori.
Indeed. And our friend, Mr. Mukhtar Mohammed, that is not to say Mr. Henry Boyo is not our friend. He's been our friend from time immemorial. Mr. Mukhtar Mohammed is a stockbroker and financial analyst. As always, thanks a million for coming on.
Thank you, sir.
Now, Uncle Henry, first of all, this is one area that I know we've been talking about this. You've been teaching about this, as it were, well over a decade, as far as I can remember, especially as it relates to our policy on the dollar, which you have always taken exception to. Now, that's perhaps another story. But maybe you could help us. Businessmen, industrialists like yourselves, they want the cost of money to be affordable. MPR is not actually moving in that direction, but the CBN governor says for good reason. Would you agree with him?
The CBN governor is obviously right for good reason, but the good reason, I would probably say for bad reason instead of good reason. First, I should clarify that the MPR is not the money, it's not the rate at which you borrow from. It's the rate the banks have to pay the CBN whenever they borrow from the bank. You see, the banking...
So it doesn't really affect, at the end of the day, it doesn't have an impact on the cost of money to whoever wants to access it.
I was going to go there. The CBN lends to the banks. If you are a banker or you create a bank, you are allowed to borrow an almost inexhaustible supply of funds from the central bank. Because as a bank, it is not the money that your shareholders put there alone that you use for business. You are allowed to go and borrow anything, so long as you don't exceed certain limits with the CBN. So that's why some people say, to own a bank is to be given a license to print money. Basically, that's what it is, okay? So if you have a situation where the central bank is lending to the banks at 14%, and the banks also have to make money, you wouldn't expect them to lend at the same 14% or below, especially when they would come up and tell you, and the government will support them, that they are carrying all kinds of burdens, like losing their own generations, as if those industrialists also don't have the same challenges. But the important thing is that you will find that the bank will lend to the third party at 14% plus in order to make. And usually at this present time, I think the rates range from anything from 20 to 30-something%. And the Manufacturers Association have constantly insisted that they cannot grow with that and they were demanded about 5%. So in other words, if you have to meet the requirements of the manufacturers for 5%, it means MPR has to be below 5%, maybe 3%. And that's not an unusual thing. In fact, we are the peculiar ones. The successful economies everywhere in the world will probably have an MPR of anything from 0 to maybe 3% or something like that. But to be talking of an MPR of 14% means that you are consciously, deliberately ensuring that those people who want to borrow to do business, only the crazy ones will borrow at 20-something%, especially when it is fundamentally an infrastructural investment, not a portfolio investment, which is just, buy and sell and this type of thing, especially with the foreign portfolio investors that are coming to the country. So immediately for maintaining an MPR of 14%, you are deliberately constricting growth in the country, because it is not the government budgets that create growth. Government policies would, but government policies are supposed to be designed in such a way as to bring salutary benefits like lower cost of funds to the real sector, because when the real sector is galvanized, they would employ people. There's a limit to how many people the government can employ. But in every economy, it is the private sector that drives the economy. But if the private sector has to borrow at 20-something%, as I say, only crazy people would borrow at that kind of rates. At the same time, you find that cost of funds, including the MPR itself, is normally predicated on the inflation rate. So the question must be, what is driving the inflation rate such that the CBN cannot afford to bring MPR to best practice levels of maybe even 2-3%?
Okay.
The reality, of course, is that the CBN cannot do that because they constantly have an eternal problem of battling or managing or unsuccessfully managing the problem of surplus cash. Surplus cash means that if you have too much cash within the system, it means that the ratio of cash to goods and services must be very wide. Consequently, you would have inflation. The question you would ask from that is that who creates the excess funds? How can you say there are excess funds in the economy when the real sector says we don't even have funds? The reason is because the central bank is busy every week or every other week helping to borrow the money out of the system so that the money does not arrive in the hands of the real sector. And they not only deliberately do that, they consciously pay interest rates that make it impossible or make it attractive for the banks to follow the money lent to government, which is risk-free, and we should normally be not more than 2 or 3%.
Okay.
But when you have the government borrowing at 14-15%, then you know something is fundamentally wrong.
Okay. You touched on, Mr. Boyo touched on the inflation rate itself. Now, right now, central bank information and central bank governor says it's at 16%. And they're watching, they don't want it to get any worse. In fact, they're looking for an ideal of somewhere between 10 and 12%, according to the central bank governor. So at the same time, we heard that he had said that, look, one of the strategies is injecting dollars into the system. So tell me, how does all this work then if we're trying to keep inflation rate down? Why is it difficult to bring it down from the 16 to where they want it to be? Anywhere, if wishes were horses and beggars could ride, the CBN governor said he'd like somewhere between 10 and 12%.
Well, maybe, I don't know if the CBN governor says inflation is 16, but I think it's talking from where we are coming from. I think at now its inflation rate as released by Nigerian Bureau of Statistics is about 12-something%. And the CBN...
So we're doing good then, well, relatively speaking?
Relatively speaking, we could say from where we are coming from.
It's been much worse.
Coming from.
So
we are coming from an inflation rate of almost 19%. So we are now at 12%. So consistently the rate has been coming down, which is fine. When you look at, I keep saying, when you look at the CBN, you look at the monetary policy, then you want to come back and look at the fiscal policies. Now, what we have been keeping our economy floating is monetary policy. The fiscal policy have not synergized with the monetary policy to bring that required growth, to bring down the rates.
One moment, please. It's all right for economists and all of that. Fiscal policy, monetary policy. In the most simplistic terms you can imagine, what's the difference?
Fiscal policy is what the government is supposed to do. Monetary policy is what the CBN itself is supposed to do. When those two comes together, rate comes down.
Okay. When you say what government is supposed to do, you're talking about the policies of government? Okay.
Infrastructure. Government
that investors are complaining about, the flip-flopping, the lack of
continuity.
He said,
the government borrowing, instead of allowing business to borrow, government is the highest borrower in Nigeria.
Okay. So all those things come on fiscal policy.
It comes around fiscal
monetary policy.
Monetary policy, bringing down inflation, trying to control, trying to bring back currency stability, foreign exchange stability, breaking in at a rate like what we have now.
So I understand you when you said the two actually have to coincide.
They have to coincide. They are not coinciding. What we're saying is that the CBN is doing its own, and the CBN keep advising. Remember, before this meeting, the first meeting of the CBN was advising the government to begin to save more. Mm-hmm. So everybody's independent. Ordinarily, everybody's supposed to be independent of themselves, but they're supposed to play the same thing down. No, the CBN have two masters. If they have a master they are tackling here. I think they had two masters, and the government itself was supposed to bring the growth part of the master, which is supposed to be the third master. The first master the CBN is tackling is inflation. The second master they are trying currency stability. Now, they want to attack currency stability. They try to create the import investment window, and that has brought relative stability coupled with the price of oil. Now, they want to tackle the monetary policy rate, inflation. They are constantly bringing it down. But now, you need to stimulate the economy. That's where they have a challenge. And like he said, you don't borrow at 14% from you, the CBN. And then you want to borrow. The banks are in business to make money. And any government has two things to do. You empower your people and security. And an empowerment part has to do with providing the enabling environment, infrastructural-wise, policy-wise. Then it's like demand and supply. When you have those things in place, rate itself will generally come down, because then the banks will not be running to the CBN to borrow money. Most of these banks are not as liquid as that. Even when they are liquid, they try to get more from the CBN. And when they get this, they just loan it back to the government, back to Treasury bill. Because the banks are not ready to take that risk in the economy that we are now. Because then you don't want to blame them. The non-performing loan of the bank is in the all-time high. So they want to reduce this non-performing loan. So they are looking for safe investment niche. Now, the government will borrow at 17%, at 17%, 14%. Now, the government is not creating on that. Remember, they came with the Eurobond. They went outside to borrow at 7%. And when they borrow at 7%, they are not using it to service debt. That's the challenge. They are saying they are using the borrowing 7% to pay contractors so that the economy can stimulate, because they realize that a lot of companies that government is doing business with are no more into business because they are being owed by government. So we have a challenge. How can we address this? Unfortunately, we are still an economics that is import dependent. So these things we keep playing. We have the 40 ban item. They are banned from accessing funds. They are not banned from coming into Nigeria. And most Nigerians, about 60 to 70% Nigerians, still have a right, still use these 14 ban items. They are still able to use it. What they do is that they source for the fund their own self. Nobody is stopping them from sourcing for the fund their own self. So, and again, Nigeria as a country, we are not even developing that skill, those 40 ban items. We are not beginning to create a market for them here. Because if you want to create a market for them, you look at the infrastructure, you look at everything is not in negotiation. So CBN actually are in a dilemma. And remember, the CBN government rightly pointed out, we are going to the election.
A rock and a hard place.
Yeah, we are going to the election year.
I was going to, in fact, let's bring that up later, because I was going to come down there. Because, Mr. Boyo, that also was factored in by the CBN governor that, look, we're moving into an election year as well. But even before that, you piqued my curiosity when you said only crazy people will borrow at the current rate. So I was then curious, so where do they borrow? Since they don't want to be crazy, they don't go there. Where do they borrow from?
That is why you find that businesses are generally contracting and collapsing. Those who borrow at those rates find that it's expedient, they don't have a choice.
Okay, that's what.
And so long as they continue. But let me just clarify a point. You see, you can have a very excellent fiscal plan, okay? And a fiscal plan is basically pivoted around the annual budget that the government does, in which the government says, I hope to earn so much of this, and I hope to spend so much of this. There's likely to be a deficit in between, or there will be a surplus. If there's a surplus, I'll keep it for a rainy day. If there's a deficit, then I will have to borrow to do so. In the areas of infrastructural development and things like that, the government can decide, for example, on concessioning as a way of ensuring that people get the benefit without the government spending the money. But as I said, you can have an excellent fiscal plan, and it would be nothing if the monetary plan underpinning the fiscal plan is unusual. Okay? In other words, it's not the fiscal plans that really drive the economy, because when you talk about the budget, how much is the budget every year? $21 billion, $24 billion. The so-called 9 trillion that we're talking about basically is just about $27 billion for spending in the whole country by the federal government. Meanwhile, out of that 27 billion, over 70% of that would be spent on recurrent expenses. So what do you have left for infrastructural enhancement that should benefit the people? Very small, less than 30%. So on top of that, if you now have the responsibility for creating wealth in the hands of the private sector, and yet you don't give them the tools to do so, and you say, we will diversify our economy, we will expand our economy. The things that drive those objectives are based on monetary indices. For example, inflation is the prime responsibility of any responsible government, because inflation is the instigator of all kinds of things, including insecurity, especially when it goes haywire. 12% inflation shouldn't be celebrated by anybody when best practice rates of inflation is 1 or 2 or even 3%. The reality is that if inflation, for example, is 10%, it means that every 5 years, every income earner will be losing 50% of their incomes, unless, of course, they've been adding 10% every year. I ask you a question, Yori. The Boko Haram have been horrendous in their whatever they've been doing. The Niger Delta militants also had their day, I must say. But having said so, I probably believe that none of this may have impacted on you directly.
Well,
yeah? That's fair enough, because most of us are in this same boat. But I dare say that at some time or the other, and almost all of us in this room, and almost all Nigerians would have had headaches trying to balance their income with the need to maintain a certain level of dignity in their lifestyles, because inflation, and homes have been broken, fights have ensued, all kinds of catastrophes have happened in individual homes in Nigeria, all driven by inflation. So inflation is a demon. It's the most common demon.
It's like a terrorist.
You've got it. That's right.
It's like a terrorist, really.
You don't see it, but it's busy niggling everybody, When they ask you, Ludley, and what exactly they're talking about is that the money I used to earn, which used to be enough before, is not enough anymore. That is why inflation is often taken as the most critical responsibility of any government. So inflation, on the other hand, also predicates the cost of borrowing. You wouldn't, for example, lend me 1 million naira at 10% if inflation is at 15% by the time I'm paying you. So you find that it is necessary, therefore, to keep inflation on the lead, that it doesn't exceed 2 or 3% annually, because once it does, you do what? You constrict consumer demand. When you constrict consumer demand, because people who used to buy 100 loaves before cannot buy 10 loaves. Bakeries collapse, people are thrown into job market and things like that. consumer demand contracts. And when real investors are looking and saying, I want to produce bread, I want to supply bread, and they say, the bakers are collapsing and things like that. Of course you won't. So it's the same thing, bread or whatever you are producing, it's the same thing. Consumer demand contracting because of inflation would create problems in everywhere. In addition to that, you will also find that because you would not lend to me at a rate that is less than the rate of inflation, if inflation is 12 or 13%, cost of funds will still remain. So it is not MPR. What is driving the MPR is the inflation.
You were saying earlier, Mukhtar, that when the authorities, when they came into government, one of the first things they said was about saving, that we need to save or something like that. Now, I want to ask you, everybody knows, classically, that's been the way, save. They even say, teach your children to save. But from the analysis that we've just heard, it's well nigh impossible for most people to save nowadays, even though everybody still knows that, it's an important dictum. Yes. So how are we getting by? What exactly is going on? Where is all this leading to? When people know the right thing but cannot do it because of the analysis we've just heard.
Yeah, earning power is low. No matter, like he said.
And so they still have to find a way to save out of that.
Even if the minimum wage goes to like 60 something, like 66,000, like what the Labour and government are proposing, that still would not drive it up. Because, like he rightly pointed, let's look at what was the exchange rate of the dollar to the naira at 2 years ago. It was about, 3 years ago, it was about 150 for a dollar. Then we are doing 360. So to get $1,000 before was 150,000 naira. So now a dollar is about 360,000 naira.
But not everybody pays that 360.
Well, that is...
Not everybody who accesses the dollar pays
we
that
are looking at...
That's another subject, right?
That's another subject. This is generality.
Subject. Okay.
Let's look at the generality.
Yeah, I just,
Okay. Now, look at that in this. So if before, my 150,000 naira was $1,000. Now my 150,000 naira is not even up to $500. So my earning has come down. So what are we attracting? That's what I keep saying. What are we attracting? We are attracting portfolio investors. We are not attracting direct foreign investors.
Because that's what I was going to ask. Say, the foreign direct investment that we are hampering on about, that we require, we need, is it a doable proposition in the milieu that you painted?
No, we are not attracting them. Because nobody wants to come to an economy that is driven high inflation, infrastructural decay, inconsistency in government policies. Multiple taxation. There's a lot of things, not ease of doing, even despite the vice president have tried to campaign for ease of doing business. It has not really been ease of doing business. You just need to go to our airport. When you are coming back, when you travel, you see that if you as a Nigerian is being, harassed like this, then how do you think those other foreigners will be dealt with? So we have a challenge. We have a challenge because we have not changed our lifestyle. We change government, we don't change economy lifestyle. What was the previous government doing? What was the previous CBN government doing that this is not doing? All they do is you earn the money, use it to defend your naira. You want to stabilize your naira. You inject $200 million to bring the naira to stability at the risk of foreign investors.
All of this is pretty interesting to be getting this knowledge and this information. But this whole matter about we were not doing badly, Mr. Boyo. What I mean by that is that we've come out of the recession. Government ministers will tell you at the drop of a hat that look how well we're doing. We brought it out of a recession.
See, we were not in recession over a year ago. Even 18 months ago or something, we were, maybe let's expand it and say even 2 years ago and be safe. But we were not in recession, okay? But the years before that 2 years ago, did you really truly believe that the economy was making progress? Of course, the economy wasn't making progress. It was just that by 2 years ago, 18 months ago, the whole thing crashed. But in terms of saying that you are better, how could you have been better off when inflation was trending at anything from 10 to 15, 18%? You cannot be better off. There's no magic unless, if even you go and wash yourself with some river water.
The hard-nosed economic facts cannot be changed.
That's real. So at the same time, you find that if you expect that you are going to diversify your economy, is it the government that are going to diversify? No, it's the monetary policies that will diversify the economy. First, there must be demand. For there to be consumer demand that will drive investment, inflation has to be low, okay? And in order for investors to be bold enough to come out and say, I want to cover that demand, I want to satisfy that demand, they must have access to funds. And if they have access to funds, we're not talking of funds at 20-something% or thereabouts. So when they keep hyping, we will diversify the economy. And if you notice, almost every government they say they have diversified the economy by mouth, but the reality is that, look, the diversification of the economy cannot happen without inflation going to best practice rates, cost of funds coming to 4 or 5%, so that your own manufacturers can continue to compete effectively against imports that are coming from countries where the industrialists or investors there are borrowing at 3 or 4%. There's no way you can compete. And if you say, we'll do all kinds of border control and things like that, they will still get through. Unless, of course, just like, for example, in the case of petrol, okay, we are practically subsidizing the whole of the west coast of Africa with our petrol. From the last count, according to the NNPC MD, it says there were over 2,000 petrol stations, there were 400 depots or something like that, that have the capacity to take more petrol than the whole of Why? Because it is cheaper for those people across the border to buy the petrol because of the very cheap naira. On the other hand, if you did the right thing, and instead of paying 1 trillion, 2 trillion naira in terms of subsidy, if the CBN does not compulsively auction and bet against its own currency, because that's what you're doing. If you're saying, look, Yori is auctioning his pen, you want the best price for it. So when the CBN itself takes dollars to auction against the naira, who is it going to sell the naira to? The person who sells it. And whoever offers the highest naira is basically debasing the naira. That is why you have this multiplicity of rates which don't make sense, because they encourage a lot of all sorts of things. So you'll find that unless you are attentive enough to recognize that your driving problem is that of excess liquidity, because as I say, excess liquidity, people say, where is the excess liquidity when I don't have money? But the central bank tells you there's excess liquidity because that's what it does when it mops up money. And if it does, it's not for such a strong reason, no normal person would borrow money that he doesn't need and is going to sterilize and pay interest of 15%. And your own central bank and your government is doing that, and you expect to grow, man, you're deceiving yourself.
Mukhtar, let's go back to the point you wanted to air earlier. It's an election year. How does that, because that was also one of the things that the central bank governor mentioned. So how does that factor into anything?
In an election year in Nigeria, it's a year when money is moved from point A to point B.
What are you talking about? Money that INEC needs?
We're not talking about money that INEC needs.
So what do you mean?
We're talking about money that politicians need. You need what money?
It is so significant that it would actually affect.
Yes, because
the
let me
MPR.
tell you, some politicians. I'm not talking about moving money from the treasury now. That's also part. I'm not talking about moving money from treasury now. I'm talking about where politicians have to sell his assets, his own asset, because he wants to run an election, because he needs the money. So it happens. Sometimes when you get to the electoral year, you see the stock market coming down. Most politicians have their stock there. They are selling, look, I want to go to politics.
Okay.
Some of them selling their real estate property, look, I want to sell up because I want to go to politics.
Effectively, they're doing, that's their own form of investment.
That's their own form of investment. And look at the oil benchmark. The government put the benchmark at money. So it happens. Sometimes when you get to the electoral year, you see the stock market coming down. Most politicians have their stock there. They are selling, look, I want to go to politics.
Okay.
Some of them selling their real estate property, look, I want to sell up because I want to go to politics.
Effectively, they're doing, that's their own form of investment.
That's their own form of investment. And look at the oil benchmark. The government put the benchmark at $45 per barrel. This current budget, they have upped it to about $50-something per barrel because they say the price of crude has gone up compared to if they have approved the budget at the time due. And that was giving us more room for savings. And once you save more, you can diversify. It's like a man that you have only one stream of income. How do you diversify?
You know, I got to go on a break very soon, but as you were saying those things, I was just remembering that what we have regulations, there is a limit to how much can be spent for political purposes and party purposes.
You know that has never worked.
Oh, okay.
That has never worked, and I don't think it's going to work now. If it's going to work now, it's going to work for some certain people. It will not work for some certain people, and the other certain people that will not work for will cry foul. Already we are seeing that play in the opposition party, saying that they are trying to stop them, trying to harass their members, try to freeze their account because they don't want them to have money for the coming election. So
money is not, you don't buy anything, but anyway, that
you buy election. Yeah,
I get I get ahead of myself.
You know how you buy. Just wait for the election year.
Yeah.
You see bag of rice with the politician and this thing, salt. You see Ashwebi.
All these cost money. Okay, we'll come back and find out a lot more about this, and more importantly, what exactly the Nigerian businessman can do, because the outlook you've painted here is that nothing is really changing in terms of how hard it is to access funds from the last budget, the last fiscal year, into now. Stay with us, please. We'll be right back, and we'll take your calls as well. Okay, welcome back, and we've had a couple of experts, Mr. Henry Boyo and Mr. Mukhtar Mohammed, explain the monetary rate and it being left alone for anything up to the 14th consecutive time. It's illuminating, but at the same time scary. And the other question I want to ask now is, the way you've explained it, it doesn't seem to me like rocket science.
Thank you.
If you have professionals in place and competency all over the place. However, we do hear about political economy and how some things are better taken from a political perspective rather than, an economic, standpoint. So is there a sense in which politicians and politics are interfering with what effectively is a science, monetary, all this? It's a science, straightforward.
Absolutely.
Is politics interfering? Wait! Don't make that 2 + 2 + 2 = 6. Don't go there. Is it as bad as that?
I wouldn't ascribe it to politics. I would ascribe it to confidence and lack of knowledge, and possibly also self-interest. Because like you write...
Which one is politics again now? If you say you won't assign it to politics, which one is politics?
And what I'm saying is that you find that it is not the politics that determines our situation. As I explained earlier on, if you have a fantastic fiscal plan, which is not underpinned by a good monetary framework, it is nothing, basically. You won't achieve your objectives. But you can have a useless fiscal plan. But if you have a good monetary framework predicating it, in fact, the corruption, the leakages and things like that would reduce. The present system of monetary policy encourages this kind of reckless financial behavior that
which is the exact opposite of what this administration would appear to want.
Well, this is why I said knowledge and self-interest, okay? If, for example, you are aware that the amount of money that you are going to spend at the end of the year through the budget is only a very limited amount, you would find that the amount can be indirectly controlled by monetary policy. For example, the biggest leakage within the system that is creating so much disruption in the economy, quite clearly, is the manner in which the Naira rate of exchange is determined. It is ab initio destined that the Naira would continue to depreciate, even if your dollar earnings triple and quadruple. Wow. Which you might say, wow, but yes, look back in history. When we had $60 billion reserves, and we are going back there, did your Naira improve from 130 to 100? No. When we had the crude oil price at about 45 or something, people said, oh, the Naira is falling because they are not earning more revenue or more dollars. At the time that we now have almost $50 billion or something like that reserves, because crude oil price is going to 80 or thereabout. Are you hearing anything about Naira becoming stronger? The reality is that the process of determining the Naira rate of exchange is abnormal and defective and counterproductive. And so long as we continue with that system, you can forget any prospect.
In spite of having a regulator in place.
That's why I say self-interest and knowledge.
Okay, I got to take DATS now. DATS is in the UK and he's been holding on for a while. Thank you very much, sir. Good morning, DATS. B-A-T-S. BATS. Good morning. Thank you for calling in.
It seems to negate history.
The line is not very good. I mean, you're not on the speakerphone or anything.
No, I'm not.
Let me listen for a few more seconds. Maybe it'll clear up. Go ahead, please.
Okay. What I'm trying to say,
no such luck. The connection is bad. It's unfortunate. Usually we get crystal clear, connections from the UK and all over, but unfortunately this is bad. We can't hear you well, and it's an important and complicated thing you want to talk about. So we can't have your sound dropping out, intermittently. But thank you very much for calling. See if you can try and connect again, and we'll come back to you immediately. Well, again, Mukhtar, one of the things that Mr. Boyo said that surprises me a bit is that he said this will depend largely on knowledge, how you run this whole thing. And I say that, look, there are experts all over the place, including your very selves that sit down here, and those available to government, all sorts of advisors. Why are we? Where is the shortage of? It reminds me of the Hemingway water everywhere. But what's going on?
Well,
why is there a deficit in expertise, in spite of we all knowing what needs to be done?
He have said it's self-interest. Then, if who you are advising is listening. A former president said, as my advisor, yours is to advise me. And I decide whether I practice it or not. So it has to do with the political will to do what you have to do. Sometimes the political will is not there. Yeah, but in an election year now, or they will be thinking...
I beg your pardon, I'm going to come straight back to you. Forgive me for interrupting you. Maxwell in Temagana has come in. Good morning, Maxwell.
Good morning, Yori, and good morning to my senior brother, Boyo, and Mohammed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Boyo is your junior brother. Now, wow. Senior brother, you said? Afofia?
Boyo, and my brother.
Afofia. Okay. Go along, Maxwell.
Yes. You see, I have an issue with this MPR, but Nigerians doesn't need death. What we need in Nigeria is electricity to be up and running. There are so many companies that are relocating from Nigeria to Ghana. The reason why most of us find it, necessary to live in Ghana is because of adequate 24 hours, 2/7, 1 month, 2 months, no power outage. Your businesses will run. Government will save money. Government will have time to give, to deliver deliverables. Nigeria will constant life. Let business flow. Let the artisans work so that more pressure will not be on the government. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for calling in. And on that particular point, I was just watching television, and I saw where the president was actually, talking to former President Obasanjo and how he squandered $16 billion, that was meant for electricity and all of that. Of course, the former president has fired back that go and look at my watch, the book I wrote, My Watch. I've explained it there. So, but this also factors in.
We are in that. We've not had government that takes responsibility. We have government. Government is supposed to be a continuous thing. If one government is not working, when the other government come, it try to up its game and make what seems not to be working in that other government work now. But what we have always seen is the previous government or the other government blaming the previous government, the next government blaming the next government. We've not had people that have taken responsibility to say, look, what do we have to do? I want to seek expert opinion. Like Uncle Boyo said, he has been saying this for over 15 years. Yeah. And I have not seen where he has been made a senior assistant to the governor of this state or to the president who come. This is your theory that you are saying. How workable is it?
Let me see how this thing
works.
How
is it workable?
Mazi Okoroafo in Abia, good morning.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, our guests in the studio. Honestly speaking, sir, you see, Nigerian monetary policy is always shaking. It's not stable. You go to the market today with your budget from your house for the consumables, you see the price has changed. Now you ask yourself, why is it so? If you start asking yourself, why is it that we don't have a stable market price in any our variables? This is the situation what we are facing in Nigeria. Now the question now is this: the government comes out with a policy, and they come out with a we are just operating what we call the theoretical aspect of it. In terms of practicality, it's not there. So that is why today in Nigeria, we are still seeing the rice that we have been hammering that the rice Nigeria is producing rice. The rice is supposed to go down by now. The rice is still 15,000 made in Nigeria, and foreign one is 16,000. 16 Nigeria, 16 foreign one. You go to Ghana, which is consumable, which is at least 60% of those people that consume Ghana. What is Ghana? Ghana price is still at 250 or 200 naira. Ghana is supposed to go down at least 150 in a country like ours. Now, ask yourself, what is the way out of it? Do we have process? That is why each country or each state should do what? Go to the product that have the comparative advantage. This will help us. We are only good in theory, we should stop that. Thank you very much. Have a blessed day in Lagos.
Indeed, thank you very much for calling in. Mr. Boyo, what then do we do? And by we, I mean, we've been hearing that the most ideal case scenario is for people to come out of school and not be looking for a salaried job somewhere. Ideally, work for yourself, and we've heard that kind of an idea. In fact, there is one university that actually sends out, I think he calls them eagles, training their mindset to be, look, it's okay to be looking for a job in Chevron and all of those, but think about becoming an employer yourself. Start small and grow and all of that. But from what you were explaining, those ideas about a youngster wanting to actually go in, I don't know, is there a place you'd advise him to go? Because it looks like nothing is changing from last year to year before last in terms of being able to borrow anything to start anything. So what is the option now? Maybe agriculture.
You see, I understand your consternation, but it would be easier for you to see even the participation of all these young people you are talking about, to see them within the context of a properly run economy. In other words, you find that the youngster you are expecting to build his mind and be innovative and things like that, at some point in time, he would be requiring funds in order to make his business, instead of one person, 10 people, 30 people, and build a... And then he starts going from... and then they're still telling him, you should go and bring your mother, and she mustn't be more than 5 years old or something, that kind of thing. And you find that as a result of ignoring those critical indices, in the first place, how much demand would that young man be satisfying when people cannot buy enough to feed? Whatever that young man is producing compared to what is being imported in container loads at cheaper prices and things like that, it's a whole thing. It's not isolated. An economy is, like you like to say, it's a well-oiled machine. You do this one, that's why I say you cannot ever expect that you grow your economy when your own practice predestines that the more you earn, the poorer you will become. Because that's exactly what has happened over the years. When we had $4 billion worth of reserves in 1998, just before the transition, the naira was about 80 naira to a dollar. When we had $60 billion worth of reserves and we were told that it would take it would be enough for 30 months if we didn't earn anything more, the naira had gone to 100 and something naira to a dollar. Today, it is 300 and something naira. We have shortchanged ourselves because the monetary framework does not encourage growth. You have a situation where before the devaluation, we were talking about a gross domestic product of $400 and something billion, okay? Suddenly with the devaluation, the thing came to 300 and something. So the more you work, ultimately you collapse, and so you are busy not even matching on one spot, you are retrogressing. Actually, this is the reality, this is the true story.
One step forward, two steps backwards.
Absolutely.
Mr. Hassan in Lekki, thank you for holding on. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Yori.
Yeah.
Good morning, Dr. Boyo.
Mr.
And good morning, Mukhtar. Please, this issue of economic analysis, I'm quite impressed with the analysis made by all of you. And I can see the patriotism in you in analyzing the economy, where we are and where we are supposed to be. You see, this issue is very clear. You can see the problem we are having with our banks. The banks will take money from federal government, the CBN, and now loan the same money back to the CBN because they found their place to be a safe haven for them to do so. But the issue is this.
Why is such a policy allowed? Why is it allowed? Hassan, doesn't the question occur to you that why is this permitted?
Mr. Yori, allow me to say it all. The banks are not our friends.
No.
Banks are meant to loan out money to people. And we knew why the system is failing. It's because of the corruption involved in the lending of the banks. And now, they are now trying to bury their heads in shame. We knew. And there's no way. We are moving forward quite okay in the economy. First of all, we knew from the beginning that the CBN governor is our number first enemy. We knew. Because they went with their committee to depreciate the naira through the back door. We knew that. Against the will of the hierarchy of the government. And we are seeing the corruption involved in the banks. The banks were involved in round tripping. We knew. But all our policies are there. The issue is not with the policy. The issue is with us. We should begin to look at ourselves and talk to ourselves and be patriotic with ourselves. If you look at the system now very well, we have succeeded in making sure the scramble for the naira or for the dollar to buy right has reduced drastically. But what you are seeing now is this. Are our businessmen here to us? No. When you go to the market, let me tell you the psychology in the market. If you go to the market today, despite the fact that there is a stability in the dollar, our businessmen will continue telling you that this is an old stock. For how long are we going to continue to have an old stock?
Indeed. Thank you very much for calling in, Mr. Hassan. I really appreciate your calling in. Thank you very, very much for calling in. He touched on something there. When we talk about corruption, we usually think in terms of politicians only, the political parties, the politicians and all of that. He's talking about corruption within the banking system. And we've been hearing, little whisperings of this. How bad a situation is this alleged corruption within the banking system? It's so self-interest thing all over again.
When I look at the banking sector, I look at a man that is in business and look at the loophole and capitalize on it, because those people that are supposed to close that loophole are not closing that loophole.
Right.
That is just exactly. Bankers are those people that gives you umbrella when it is raining. I mean, when it is sunny, they give you the umbrella. Then when it is raining, they collect the umbrella for you. So the rain will whip you very well. So they're in the business to make money. And they will continue to do.
Making money for your organization is one thing.
It's not only bank in Nigeria.
Okay.
It's not only bank in Nigeria, but you see that in other parts of the world, there are strong monetary agencies. There are CBN. Of recent, JB Morgan was fined about 1.something billion for illegal trading. You see it. There are punishments for every infringement. But in this part,
We've never heard of that kind of thing here. Never.
Even when they have
Maybe I missed it.
No, even when there are mistakes, when they have it, you see the CBN trying to resolve it, because they say there are some banks that are systematic. Maybe there are any shock on those banks is a systematic failure in the system. So they try to see. I remember we had issues when the TSA came in. Some banks refused to remit. Yes. Some banks remit. Some banks, and you know the annoying thing is that the so-called big banks, as it's going now, the big banks are eventually swallowing the smaller bank. Look at the profit. You realize that even in their 2018 financial report, realize that about 80% of the profit comes from the big four. So the other smaller banks, which are sometimes very friendly even to the SME and others, just have 20%.
Bats in the UK, thank you for trying to get in again. Good morning.
Good morning.
This is very, very clear. Thank you very much for calling in.
It's okay. I'll say kudos to the journalist program. Let us start from the disappearance of that big bank from Nigeria. Let us go. Before then, let us go to the Indigenization Act of 1976, which led to the disappearance of Barclays Bank from Nigeria, Lowlands, Kingsway, and so on and so forth. Then from there, the mass migration from the rural area to the urban area. I'm just emphasizing it so that we can learn from history. Then let us from there move on to land tripping. There is something we call land tripping within the banking sector in Nigeria. Okay, let's leave that. Let's now go to the soldiers on that program now talking. We have them in Nigeria in thousands, even in millions. But the political system does not actually create a political environment for people like this to be involved in politics. If they are not involved in politics, how can they emerge as competent economists to advise government the way they have been talking to you on that program now? If they are not allowed and given the opportunity, how can they emerge as members of NPC committees that will doctor and advise Central Bank of Nigeria on what to do to keep the value of Naira, and advise the federal government of Nigeria, the cabinet, on what to do, which policy to embark on to keep Naira value? If we don't have to do like this in government, as advisors, or presidents, or governors, where do you think we are going in Nigeria?
All right then, Mr. Batts, thank you very much for calling in. We've run out of time, and but we do appreciate your call. The depressing thought is that following your analysis and also following the whole matter about the 14% policy, monetary policy rate, which you've explained will ultimately have an effect on the lending rate, is still 14%. It therefore means nothing is changing. So what am I supposed to do as a businessman, as an entrepreneur, as anybody? Is more shuffling and smiling. Really?
I want to say that,
very briefly, sir,
if I could, if there's one thing I would leave behind here, it's that we are being goaded into slavery. That's
oh dear, as dramatic as that.
It is as dramatic as that. Don't let's kid ourselves. Debt has doubled in the last 3 years, and we still maintain a pattern of determining the Naira rate of exchange that is totally destructive and pauperizing to the people of this country.
Okay.
A situation where you have dollars being sold in rations in a market that is already deliberately, consciously suffocated with Naira is an endless road to doom for our people.
And this is a point that you've been making for at least 10 years that I can remember.
15 years.
In fact, it goes back 15 years. Mukhtar, any last thoughts? The suffering and smiling is going to continue, but Nigerians are incurable optimists.
Well, yes, that's what I want to say. We are incurable optimists. If for the past, I said, why change? They will tell you why change the winning team. If this same policy has brought us from a height of inflation of about 19% and we're in 12%, why not just keep doing it until we begin to get that level playing field, whereby we can begin to bring rate down. And like the CBN governor said before he came to power, he's not playing out, he's not looking like that. He said he's coming to run a developmental economy. We've not seen that play. Rather, we've seen a controlled economy by government. So going forward, we still need to be optimistic. We still believe that something will happen, and the rate is going to come down. I definitely believe that the MPR rate is going to come down. But when is what we are looking at now.
Thank you very much, Mukhtar Mohammed, stockbroker and financial analyst, and thank you very much, Henry Boyo, industrialist and economist, for the enlightenment. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So that's our program. Please join us tomorrow for a fresh edition. I'm Yori Folarin. Bye-bye for now.